great to be here. I'd normally be putting the kids to bed at this time. And as I sort of walked in downstairs, I was like, oh, is this how real people live? I'm normally at home now, sort of, I don't know, having fish fingers being thrown at me. And look at all these people just drinking and having fun. I'm going to do that, get a babysitter. So taking the next step in investing. So I'm going to talk to you tonight. Kind of my basic premise is actually investing doesn't have to be that difficult. To do it reasonably well, which is all we really need to be able to do, isn't that hard. So I'm going to sort of cut through the jargon and I'm going to say here there are 4 decisions I think we all need to make. And then I'm going to share sort of Holly's 3 golden rules. And then that is it, okay? And if I say anything at any point that doesn't make sense, shout at me, okay, or stick a hand up. So just a sort of quick intro, what do we do with boring money? I set it up simply to help people make better choices with their investments and pensions. And I remember really clearly when I decided I just had to do something about this. I just had my second child. I was in the sort of hiatus that is nappies and baby grows and sleep deprivation and cabbage leaves and all that really fun stuff. And in those days, because I'm quite old, the Child Trust Fund pack plopped through the letterbox, and that was what is now the Junior ISA. And honestly, if you've had no sleep for about what felt like 3 years, and I kind of read this sort of 80-page document, I remember just going, I don't know what they're on about, and I've been working in investments for 15 years. I thought at that point, I'm going to help people who think that money is boring and help them to make some better choices. So that's what boring money does. So I'm going to talk to you tonight, and I'm going to kick off with my 4 decisions that I think we all need to make. So the first decision is, which basket do I use? And this is what in the industry people call the tax wrapper, okay? And here's a list of the main tax wrappers, and sadly there are quite a lot of them there that you'll need to sort of get your head around and make some decisions. And here are some of the things that will help you make those decisions. The big one that people ask us about is saying, okay, I'm doing this investing thing, I'm trying to set some money aside. ISA or pension, which should I do? And of course, it's not necessarily an either or. The kind of main difference is with an ISA, you can take it out at any point. You can get your hands on that money should circumstances change and you want to take it out. AJ Bell will be sad that you are, but you can take that money out of the ISA. Once you put your money into a pension, you cannot get your mitts on it till you're at least 55, okay? So it's that time frame thing you need to evaluate. So it's sort of helpful to think about, what's my long-term stash? What am I doing to be responsible the longer term? And what are my shorter-term savings? So sort of have a think about that. The other thing, though, about pensions, it sounds so boring. People talk about pensions, tax relief. But think of it like free money. That's a bit more interesting, okay? And I think this sort of gets overlooked. For basic rate taxpayers, for every £80 you stick in a pension, you get £20 from the government for free. Honestly. The only sort of drawback is you can't get it till you're at least 55. So it's like the government's bribe for you being good and kind of looking after yourself later in life so we won't all suddenly be dependent on the state. So it's their little bribe to you for being good and responsible. But you get that money, it's free money. And if you're a higher rate taxpayer, you put in your 80 quid, they'll give you £20. But when you come to do your tax return, you can claim back an extra £20. So there's even more benefits if you're a higher rate taxpayer. So for me, I think it's sensible to sort of have a balance, to sort of top up a little bit into the ISA and a little bit into the pension, okay? Now, workplace pensions have come along, and most of you, if you're working, your boss has to pay in at least 3% a year now, okay? It's worth asking, especially if you work for a bigger firm, it's worth asking, get on the phone to HR and bother them and say, will you match any extra contributions? And what this means is with some of the companies, if you say to them, well, if you take another 1% from me, will you also give me an extra 1%? And many of them do, and people don't really know about it. And that's like getting a 1% pay rise. So check out, if you particularly work for larger companies, if they will match any extra pension contributions. But generally, and lots of people have asked me about this, they're not quite sure whether to trust their workplace pension. Is it any good? I would say, by and large, it's a really good way to save because your employer will pay in too. And if you opt out or step away from it, you don't get any of that extra money from your employer. So then we get into this position where you might want a bit of an ISA, you might want to save into a private pension yourself, but there might also be something going on at work. Okay? The final thing, and I'm sorry to do this, you can blame the government, not me, for making this complicated, is if you're under 40 and you're saving for a house and you're absolutely dead set on buying that house, then you can save up to £4,000 a year into a lifetime ISA, and you get £1,000 for free from the government, okay, every year. But it's only worth doing if you're absolutely sure you're going to buy that house, because if you don't and you say, I've changed my mind and I'm going to take it out, there are penalties to pay, and the benefits of it just disappear. So I think it's one of those products that's a bit complicated. It's only worth doing if you're dead set certain that you will buy a property. And also, annoyingly for me, you have to be under 40 to do that. Okay? Retirement, you can as well. So if it doesn't bother you, you've got that either or. You're absolutely right. So you can save into it, and there are two things you can use it for. It's either that property, but if you change your mind and you don't then need to access it to do something else with it, and you leave it alone, it can count towards a retirement income as well. So it can be an alternative to a pension. Right, so that's the basket bit, okay? Then we go, how do I want to invest? Do I want to buy lots of different ingredients? Am I just over this, and do I just want a ready meal? Okay, there's things called robo-advisors out there. So what am I going to kind of put in these baskets? What am I going to put in my ISA? What am I going to put in my pension? And this is the bit that sort of flummoxes most people, okay? And I've put down here what I think the basic decisions are. I personally don't buy shares anymore, because I used to when I thought I was some hotshot and really good at this, and I lost loads of money, and it was really uncool, and I don't buy shares anymore. Because the problem with buying shares is you typically, unless you've got tons and tons of money and tons of time, don't actually have very many of them. So you might only have about 6, 7, or 8, and then you're so reliant on 8 companies doing really, really well. And if they don't, you kind of haven't backed enough horses, right? So I've personally been burnt. I think it takes a lot of time and effort and attention to try and pick shares that are going to outperform. And do I think I can do that job better than someone whose day job is to sit there and stare at a screen all day and follow it? No, I don't. So there are people out there who invest in shares and love it. Really good quote, I think, from George Soros, a really, really successful investor. He said, good investing should be boring. If you're enjoying it, you're probably not doing very well. I think that's quite profound. So I use funds, partly because I'm lazy, partly because I'm busy. I refer to kids throwing fish fingers at me, and not much time for sort of trading shares. And with funds, you've got a few different options. Funds are just big collections of investments. I'll say shares, but they can be bonds and other things, but let's just say shares for now. Typically, there's about 50 to 100 shares in this fund, and you can own a slice of that fund, okay? Which means you get access to all of those shares without having to buy all of the individual ones. And you can buy a fund that is really super focused on one area, so something like global technology. Or you can actually say, and I like increasingly these funds, it's like going to the supermarket and taking a ready meal off a shelf. Those are the multi-asset funds. I love multi-asset funds. I think they are the answer to many a DIY investor's problems. You can buy a multi-asset fund, and someone who's sat looking at the screen all day has gone, we'll have a bit in America, have a bit in Asia, we'll have a bit over there, I'll blend that all for you, Holly, don't worry about it. And we'll make sure we're spread across sectors and different industries, and we might have some bonds in there. And they're kind of building all of this for you, and you just have to make one decision and buy one thing. And the beauty of it is as well, is it's not just buying the investments that hard work, it's kind of keeping up with them and maintaining them, and someone else does all of that too. So if you sort of think that actually you just want to invest, you want to have a broad range of stuff in a broad range of countries, in a broad range of sectors, and actually, frankly, you've got better things to do with your time, have a look at multi-asset funds. And then ETFs, I put that there in inverted commas. I always think that sounds like sort of UFOs or sort of little green things from outer space. It stands for exchange-traded funds. They're collections. They are passive investments, okay? And when people talk about passive investments, the difference between passive and active investments. Passive investments track an index. So let's give you an example, the FTSE 100, the 100 biggest companies in the UK. HSBC is 6% of the FTSE 100, a massive, massive company. So if you ran a FTSE 100 passive fund and someone gave you £100, you would put £6 of it into HSBC. It doesn't matter what you think about HSBC, totally irrelevant. 6% of the index, 6% of your money goes in there. An active fund is where someone's going, I met with HSBC CEO last week and I thought he was a wally, so we're not going to invest in him. We might put 1% in there, not 6%. You're paying someone to make a decision, to make some bets. They're probably not bets, they wouldn't say they were bets, to make some calls about which way things are going to go. They're therefore more expensive because you're paying for more brain power to think about those. And there's different approaches and different beliefs here. Some people swear by passive funds, because they say the active guys cost a lot and can't outperform. Other people say, well, no, I think there are people out there who can make some smart calls. So that's a decision that people tend to make as well. But an ETF is a very low-cost way. If you just want to say, oh, just give me the FTSE 100 and spread my money between all of those firms and don't try and do clever sort of stuff with it. I want low-cost access to the biggest companies in a particular market. ETFs are a nice way spread your money around. Question 3, how spicy do you want your investments to be? We talk about risk a lot, don't we, in investing, and I think it's a really stupid way to articulate the question because, you know, risk, we just think risk is bad, right? What's the risk of skiing? Break your leg. What's the risk of sort of crossing the road when the lights go, I die, right? So we don't really think that there is any upside to risk. But when people are talking to you about how risky an investment is, they simply mean, is it going to be like cash? Going to go like that? Is it going to be a bit like the FTSE 100, up and down and up and down? Or is it going to be like investing in Uzbekistan, which is kind of going all over the place? That's all they mean when they're talking about risk. So what I would say, and there's lots of younger faces in the audience as well, let's go back to that sort of pension ISA decision earlier. If you're investing in a pension and you're in your 20s, that money's locked away for 30 years. It doesn't matter if things are going like that, okay? Risk can be a good thing, but when risk is terrible is when you're a forced seller. So if you've only got a year time frame and you want to buy a house in a year and you're in things that are going like that, and when they're like that, you need to sell, that's when it bites, okay? So that's why you've got to sort of think, when it comes to risk, okay, it's just talking about the volatility here, but it's not necessarily a bad word. And I've seen loads of us, it's like picking wine on a menu, isn't it? You sort of pick the third cheapest one or something. And when people are picking risk profiles between 0 and 10, most of us pick 5 because, I don't know, that's comfortable. Sometimes that will be right, but don't necessarily always be afraid of risk, okay? Because sometimes some of those spicier investments, if you're investing for a super long time frame, are not necessarily a bad thing. I've got to put my thingy up. And then the regions as well, have a think. I put sort of Pakistan and Indonesia. I've got junior ISAs for my kids. And there's nothing like teaching kids about investment than the sort of bit of sibling rivalry. So I happened to stuff up simply because I forgot my son's password. So my kids now have different asset allocations and are in different things. And so my daughter did better last year than my son. And he was absolutely outraged. And it happened to be because she had one of my spicier investments. It's the BlackRock Frontiers Investment Trust, which is hairs on your chest stuff. I mean, it does invest in Pakistan and sort of all these kind of spicy countries. I wouldn't really recommend it, but I have to get my kicks somehow these days. And my daughter was in it, and she did really well. So my son saw. So now every time I talk to my son about investing, he's like, "Mummy, I want to invest in Pakistan." And I'm like, no, okay. So think about how spicy you want it. And the sort of, should I go green? I mean, increasingly, you'll hear sort of more people talking about sustainable investing. And I think this is such an interesting area, and I kind of see it particularly sort of women tend to be more interested in this than men when they write into us. And I think it's such a lovely idea that actually I can be an activist with my pension. And actually I don't want to invest in certain things. And the more of us that do that, I think that's actually when we start to see real sort of change beyond us thinking about keep cups and other things like that. So we have some new content on our website. We have a tribe called Sustainable Savers, so you can check it out there. But it's a really interesting new thing that we can start to think about in terms of putting our money to work. Right, I've got 4 minutes left. I've got enthusiastic, so I shall now do my 3 golden rules in 4 minutes. Rule number 1, don't be greedy. I did, honestly, when I first started in finance, I worked for Merrill Lynch. I thought I was a real hot shot, a bit sort of cocky. There's the tech boom in Australia. I kind of borrowed money, bought all these dodgy shares. I didn't know what they do, and I lost a lot of money, and I learned the hard way because I had to pay that money back, and I didn't have it. You know, the interest rate is 0.75%. That's the risk-free rate, okay, of return. So someone sends you a too good to be true thing going, "Oh, I'll give you 10%, happy days, come in, be suspicious." Because, you know, there's risk and return, right? So why is it 10%? It's because you're taking some risk. So just be careful about these sort of get-rich-quick promises. I'm also really suspicious about peer-to-peer stuff, by the way. I hate it. But anyway, I digress. Diversify. 300 years ago in London, people were approached for sackfuls of gold by people who wanted to take a ship over to India and pillage lots of stuff that wasn't theirs and bring it back and kind of make great riches. Of course, that was all fine until the ship would sink on the way home, and you suddenly go, "Oh, I've lost all my gold." And so what actually happened is the East India Company realized that lots of people were losing all their gold, and they said, well, you can buy a stock certificate and effectively back lots of different voyages, and then if 1 or 2 ships go down, it doesn't matter. That's the concept of diversification, which you'll hear people talk about again and again. So don't have all your money in the UK. Don't have it all in the States. Don't have it all in tech firms. Okay, just think about the ships. Don't have it all on one ship. Just spread it around, because I don't care what anyone says. No one really knows what's going to happen in investment markets. No one's got a crystal ball. So the best way to protect yourself is just to have it in lots of different stuff. The technical terms here. And the third rule, this normally applies when I'm talking to a male audience more, because they love to fiddle with their investments. But, you know, I'll give you an example at the moment. People are talking a lot about the coronavirus. Have we underestimated it? How's that going to impact global markets? Are we going to have a big recession and things fall off the cliff? My own take is I think we've grossly underestimated it. The second biggest supplier of stuff in the world, i.e. China, has kind of been closed down for a few weeks. That will have a bigger impact than I think we factored in. So what have I done about it with my investment portfolio? Nothing. I can't call the timing. I'm not sure it's going to happen. I used to try and fiddle when I thought I was some young hotshot, and I never got the timing right. So now, honestly, the best thing you can do is to lose your online trading password. So Holly's 3 golden rules. Don't be greedy, diversify, and lose your password. So to sum up from me, have that balanced diet, really resist. This is the danger when you're at that point that you're starting to learn quite a lot about investing and thinking, actually, this is quite interesting. That is when you are at your most dangerous. I don't mean that to sound patronizing at all. Some of you may go on and be incredibly successful day traders, etc., but I think overcomplicating things is a bad idea. And for many of you, those multi-asset funds I talked about will be a great way to start. Little and often with AJ Bell, you can pay in. I don't work there, I'm not advertising them, but it is nice that they'll let you pay in from 25 quid a month. Set up a direct debit. Just put it into an ETF or something simple and just leave it alone. Because I worked in finance, I set up a pension with the company I was at there because they bossed me into it when I was about 28, and I didn't have very much money and I was just chipping in little bits. It's like building a snowman. It takes forever and you're pushing it and nothing happens, and then suddenly it's worth something. Little and often. Don't pay too much in fees. Don't pay too much in tax. So use your ISA for God's sakes. You've got up to 20 grand a year. You can put in an ISA and you won't pay tax. Do not fiddle. You don't know what's going to happen. None of us do. Sorry, it's just true. Pension tax relief, lovely free money. Don't forget that. Although you can't get your hands on it till you're 55. And use the tax wrappers smartly. So the lifetime ISAs, workplace pension. And phone HR tomorrow if you work, especially for a bigger company, and say, if I pay in 1% more, will you match that? If they do, you've just got a 1% tax rise. Not tax rise, pay rise. Nicer. I'm out of time. That's it from me. Thank you.